Hello, it's time to get started with our MidCo webinar, Colocation, the Cloud, and Creating Your Hybrid Solution. First, let's take care of some general housekeeping. Participants are all automatically muted. If you do have a technical issue, please submit it via the Q&A window on the right side of your screen. Use the drop-down to select the host rather than panelists. We will have a Q&A session at the end of our presentation today. You can submit a question anytime during the presentation or at the end. Just be sure to use the Q&A window on your screen. Use the drop-down to send your question directly to the panelist rather than the host. I'd like to say thanks to everyone who is joining us today from across the region. Also, this webinar is being recorded. We'll send out a link via email later this week. Speaking of people who are joining us, let's take a few moments to introduce who we have on the mic side of today's webinar. My name is Amy Mithelman, and I'm an enterprise sales consultant at MidCo. My background includes roles in finance, employee development, and telecommunications. I truly enjoy partnering with large organizations to learn about their unique needs and apply the right technology solutions to match. I'm joined by Jason Mackey, who leads the business sales engineering team. He provides customer education, service design, and product development for business customers and has more than 15 years experience in the industry. Jason is a MEF or MEF Carrier Ethernet certified professional, a Cisco certified network professional, and a Cisco certified design professional. And third, we also are live with Tim Kittela, Director of Data Center Strategies at Parallel Technologies. Parallel is a Minnesota-based company that specializes in designing and developing data centers and intelligent buildings. Tim is responsible for leading the company's data center practice, which includes helping their clients with their colocation, build, or strategy. He has a proven track record of success in the data center community. Tim's an accredited tier designer certified by the Uptime Institute, and he's also been a guest speaker at conferences such as the Critical Facilities Summit in 2018 and has been a speaker at AFCOM's Data Center World Conference for the last several years. Tim's philosophy when it comes to data center strategy is to slow down to speed up, which I'm hopeful we can discuss a little later on. Okay, let's jump in. If you've heard of MidCo, it's likely that you're already associate us with internet and TV, which isn't wrong. We do, after all, provide business and residential cable and internet solutions across 5 states in the Midwest. Along with cable and internet, we also have networking, voice, and data center solutions, plus wholesale options, serving many levels of businesses. We own, operate, and engineer the MidCo network, which spans more than 9,500 miles across our 5-state coverage, delivering high-capacity, high-quality communication services with direct connections to our data centers. Jumping into our data center discussion, I think it will help us if we start off with a poll to understand who's joining us today. So here's our question. What is your role in your organization? Owner? Whoop. We'll wait a second till I get the options up here. So what is your role in your organization? Owner, president, or CEO, chief IT manager, officer, IT staff member, or other. So I'll give everyone a moment to answer our poll. All right, looks like we have a pretty good combination of everyone joining us today. Since there may be people who didn't answer or people on the line without data center background, I'm going to give a brief overview of what a data center is and its benefits, plus a few definitions along the way of key industry terms. A few years ago, MidCo had the opportunity to take our networking solutions to the next level when we purchased DataWare, a data center company located in southeastern South Dakota. With that purchase, we acquired 2 state-of-the-art data centers, one in Yankton and one in Sioux Falls. Soon after, we broke ground on 2 more data centers in North Dakota, one in Grand Forks and one in Fargo, both fully open and operational. The 4 facilities combined with our MEF or MEF Carrier Ethernet 2.0 certified network and MEF CECP staff are set up to provide high availability and low latency, ideal for organizations looking to move data and co-locate equipment. Stopping myself there, time for a quick definition break. I mentioned that our network is MEF Carrier Ethernet 2.0 certified. What does that mean? It means that Metro Ethernet Forum, or MEF, has identified our privately owned redundant network as meeting all industry standards for performance, assurance, and agility. The MEF CECP is a certification that's granted to professionals who know the service specifications and definitions required to plan, build, and operate MEF CE networks. Third, I use the word co-locate. Co-locate or colocation is when a business houses technical equipment in a third-party data center such as MidCo's. Moving on to data center benefits. Businesses choose data centers for many reasons, and sadly, many wait until it's a little too late to make the move. So what do I mean by that? I am, of course, referencing the fact that proper data center facilities are weather-hardened and environmentally controlled. What happens with many businesses is that they house their equipment on-premise, be it in a storage room or basement, and then they become a victim to overheating or even natural disasters such as flooding. Data centers are built to brave the storm with precautions in place to battle Midwestern winds and rain. And that leads me to our next poll question. What is your current data storage situation? So we store IT equipment and data backups in-house or on-premise. We use a data center provider, we use a cloud service provider, we use a mix of several solutions, or I'm not really sure, or other. So I'll give everybody a moment to answer our poll question. All right, it looks like we have quite the mix. Some folks are using a colocation service and cloud provider mix, so that's great to hear. Data centers, back to our benefits, so data centers also provide secure, highly stable power and internet connections with the backup generator to prove it. And Tier 3 data centers even have the backup generator for the backup generator. If your business loses power for whatever reason, your data will remain running and secure. Let's pause for another definition break, plus a little history lesson. I mentioned that Tier 3 data centers have dual-use backup generators to prevent downtime, but what do I mean by Tier 3? Here's your history lesson. In 1993, the Uptime Institute started constructing a system to evaluate data center infrastructure performance, or uptime. Now present in more than 85 countries across the globe, the tier standard has become the industry's trusted global standard for data center design, build, and operation. In the US, there are about 100 data centers that are officially certified by the Uptime Institute, but data center providers all over still adhere to tier standard requirements, even if they're not officially certified. So what are the levels, you ask? The Uptime Institute outlines 4 tiers in total, each one progressive, meaning you must meet the lower requirements before achieving the next. And Jason and Tim might go into this a little bit next, but essentially knowing the level which level your business needs is something to consider when choosing an outsourcing partner. So for example, 2 of MidCo's data centers, Grand Forks and Yankton, are built to Tier 2 standard, while Fargo and Sioux Falls are built to Tier 3. Tier 2 means that there is a singular backup of power or cooling, while Tier 3 means that there is a dual backup system set up. The last benefit I'm going to highlight is lower equipment and facility costs. On top of lowering staff time and energy, power, cooling, redundancy, monitoring, growth, expansion, time, effort, among many more factors, all go into maintaining and running a data center. We know that IT professionals have a lot of other items on their plate to worry about, and co-location means that we worry about your data center environment so your internal IT staff can focus on other things, but still access equipment anytime. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jason for our Q&A session. So Jason, are you ready?
I sure am. Thank you, Amy. Like Amy said a little bit ago, my name is Jason Mackey, and I manage the sales engineering team here at MidCo. I'm here with Tim, and we're going to lead the next session, today's webinar, discussing the frequently asked questions that we receive on data centers, networking, the cloud, and everything in between. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Jason. Great to be here with you and Amy.
Yeah, before we dive into the questions, it might be good to explain how MidCo and Parallel fit together. I can start out by saying that we've been working with Parallel for quite a while, and they've been an excellent partner, and Tim can go into the details as to why.
Yeah, no, we've had the absolute honor and privilege to team up with MidCo, and we actually started with the DataWare team back in the day. We got to meet with them, built their data center in Sioux Falls and helped them out, assisted them. When MidCo made the acquisition of DataWare, we were then introduced to the portfolio and the size and the scope of what MidCo does, and how data centers could be a real stalwart in their just a stalwart in their portfolio. And excited to and privileged to work side by side with them for many years. We've then helped them expand their data center footprint from Grand Forks to Fargo to Sioux Falls, and even helped out in the Yankton data center, kind of all up and down that I-29 corridor there. But our most recent project was working in the Sioux Falls facility, bring that to a Tier 3 standard. So really quite honored and privileged to work with this team. Great team, smart people, a lot of fun to team up with.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that summary. All right, so let's get started with our first question, the real reason why we're here. How do data center tiers apply to regulatory standards? Okay, well, that's kind of a fun one. Before we tackle that answer, Ed, let's do another poll question. How positive are you that your data storage is meeting regulatory standards? I'm 100% positive, almost positive, about 50-50, or I really have no idea. And the last one, I don't know if it applies to my business. This is kind of a fun question. So my perspective, while people are answering that, is it really depends on your business. So everybody's got different regulatory standards that they need to run by. Tim's got a lot more background on that one as well, working with a lot of different organizations utilizing data center. Let's see what we get for results. Okay, so the majority answer was, I really have no idea. There was a couple that were 100% positive and a few 50-50. So we kind of run the range, but it's mostly I'm absolutely sure or I do not have any idea. So let's see if we can bring a little bit of clarity to that. Tim, what's your perspective?
Yeah, so when it comes down to regulatory standards, obviously every regulatory type organization has some sort of a checkbox or a checklist that they've got to go through whenever they're doing these. And we could be talking about PCI compliance, we could be talking about HIPAA compliance, SOC 2 compliance, all these various types of organizations that have to basically put their systems, and when we're talking regulatory, it can vary from facility to security, to IT componentry, but also data destruction, and all these things kind of overlay. And this is what people in the co-location industry have to deal with, because they are basically in the data hosting business, meaning your data is in their facility, in their square footage. But really the audit is going to apply on a client-by-client basis, whether it's on-prem or whether it's in a co-location or whether it's in the cloud. So this is why we're seeing, and if I do recall on the poll question where we asked, where are people, a strong majority had a hybrid strategy as far as where their data is located, meaning they're going to be in the cloud, they're going to be in colo, and they're going to be on-prem. Now, when we start overlaying the Uptime Institute tier standards over top of this regulatory type constraint, well, some of the check boxes, like I said, are going to be covered based upon their audits. But when we start talking uptime, we're talking about the reliability of the mechanical, electrical infrastructure and how it can support your facility. And you can either be a Tier 2 or you can either be a Tier 3. You can't be a Tier 2 plus. There is no Tier 2 plus. You either meet the requirement or you don't. And you're going to go to the lowest common denominator of whatever system's being supported. So when MidCo states that, hey, we have a facility that can meet the Tier 3 requirements. They've got dual path for power and cooling. They've got each component, and they meet a term that we use called concurrent maintainability, meaning that we can shut off an entire path and still operate that data center without interruption to the IT load. Now, uptime also dabbles into the operational parameters of how data centers are operated, which is another type of standard that they put on top of these things. And so when you're looking at a data center or a facility, how it's operated is really key to making sure that your data center stays operational and really meets the requirements, because these are made of mechanical, electrical equipment that can fail, but how it's operated, and most data center failures occur because of a human error. And so when we start looking at regulatory compliance, regulatory conversation, regulatory standards, yes, the infrastructure definitely plays a role in it, and there's definitely some overlap, but how it's operated and how it's run is really kind of key to making sure your data center. So whether you're on an on-prem or in a co-location, you got to make sure you understand how that data center is being operated, that they're going to meet the standards that's going to keep it running, because we all know the impact and lost downtime whenever a data center gets shut off or unfortunately goes down or is hit by some sort of an event. That's a painful situation, and you can get stuck with the regulatory type impacts or audits, and these things are going to be brought out and fleshed out as you start working through these processes. A great one is like a bank or a financial institution. They have to report to the Federal Reserve every day, and so you got to make sure that your data center is operational. You can get that data to where it needs to go, but more importantly, staying up and operational so your end users and your apps and all the things that they're leveraging and you're doing as an IT environment, that you're available, so that uptime, that 24/7 operation, and data being so ubiquitous, we got to make sure it's protected and that you're looking at it from these standards of compliance, but also, what is the infrastructure that is supporting it?
So basically what I'm hearing there is your strategy to maintain compliance for your industry could actually affect your cloud strategy.
That's correct.
All right. Well, next question we have here is, what are my network options with data centers? Now, this is a good one for MidCo. We always like to hear this question because we've built a solid network, and then we put data centers on that network. So well positioned in that space. How important has that been that you've seen in the industry, Tim?
So, clearly this is a key aspect when you're going through the process of, where do I put my data? Where is my data going to reside? Where is it going to live? So when you're talking about looking at the lens of, should I build, should I colo, should I cloud, and you're going to look at it from a standpoint of, what eggs should go into what basket, meaning what reliability level do we need for a certain application or certain storage device, what reliability, and match it to the proper category, and what kind of security do I need around it. In order to move this data, and because a lot of us move into this hybrid strategy of, this is how we're going to be structured, this is how we're going to work, what you need to do is to make sure that you've got good pipes. And we always like to say, when we look at a data center, does a data center have good bones? And one of those good bones, one of those important bones, is that connectivity. Does your facility have that connectivity play, whether it be redundancy in just incoming fiber connectivity, but also, do you have multiple carriers available? So one of the projects we work on here at Parallel is we do get to participate in some of the large carrier hotels of the United States, and these are known quantities. They're known by their address. You know, you think of 350 Cermak in Chicago, or the 511 building in Minneapolis, where there's multiple carriers coming in. These become very important touch points, and these are kind of the central hubs of where data resides. When you're talking about what MidCo does and the capability that they bring to the table with their thousands and thousands of miles of network and capability, let alone the dark fiber routes that they have available and accessible to them. But the fact is they did something very smart. They invited their competition into their facilities because they want that ability to have the multiple carriers, the centralized networking, the great connectivity. I think it's a smart play for them because one of the things that customers want, they want flexibility. But also the fact that data is so ubiquitous and data is so prolific. Right now it's just, you know, growing leaps and bounds growth. And not only that, you've kind of had this asymmetrical growth of data where all you care about as a home provider or at your house is what's my download speeds. Well, now that we're starting to collect video and information, we now have more of a symmetrical build out of these networks, which is exactly what these data centers must provide, is a very symmetrical data, because data in, data out, because we're leveraging these hybrid strategy. So what are we looking for? Great connectivity. The fact that you've got multiple redundant, you know, pipes into there. You got that centralized networking. Basically, you know, how are you able to pass data back and forth? And then we got this decentralization of our data as well, which is also a challenge. So, and one of the big topics right now in our industry is to talk about edge computing and edge processing and where the data. You think about the autonomous vehicles, the amount of data that they're creating, and how data needs to be processed closer to the edge, or the Netflix model where they don't want to pass movies back and forth across the United States. So they're going to batch basically movies in certain buildings and proximities for certain areas. So you're just doing lower, you know, not cross the nation data packet draws. You're doing that once, not multiple times, hundreds of times. One of the big concerns in our industry is when we talk about it is latency of applications, and how applications are essentially, you know, they have this critical bandwidth. When we talk about virtual reality, you can't have more than a 7 millisecond delay on a virtual reality or augmented reality, or you're going to start creating motion sickness. You know, so one of the big concepts, one of the big things that you have to work through as you're picking your data center strategy is think about availability, latency, cost, and risk. And that's what's going to drive you to your decision of where you put your data, where do you store your data, but then how do you leverage it, and how do you drag it back and forth from your colo to your cloud to your on-prem, and however that situation works, because latency is becoming a bigger and bigger deal because of the immense amount and the speed of what we work at, but also the amount of data that you're bringing, that could be a cost. So you want to look for a place with multiple carriers where you've got that flexibility and you're not going to get soaked with cost. And that's one of the big things, is being in these carrier hotels, or being in a place like a MidCo data center where you've got multiple options, so your hands aren't tied, and you've got and also you've got that inherent built-in redundancy of those multiple pipes coming into those facilities.
Awesome. That was a very good explanation of that. So basically what you're saying is, for the network, we need bigger, better, faster, and more. So, okay, the next question we have here is, how do data centers mitigate the impact of severe natural disasters? Okay, so I guess what I'm seeing is, from a compliance perspective, you have to maintain availability, and those organizations don't necessarily care if you've got a storm or a flood coming. So in data centers, what do people do to mitigate natural disaster problems?
One of the advantages that a colocation, or at least it should be, a colocation should have, is that it's a purpose-built building that's going to store multiple clients and multiple IT assets that allows you to mitigate these risks. However, what we deal with in my world, I deal with a lot of enterprise-type clients that have kind of inherited a room or inherited an area of their building that necessarily wasn't purpose-built but could serve as a data center. One of the big things is they kind of have to deal with their own risk in their building, and they kind of have to wrestle with these decision points where, hey, you got your data center located on this subterranean floor. Great. Are we at risk of a flood or a rain event or, my gosh, even a bathroom group over top of our data center? So that's some of the things that we wrestle with in our field when we deal with enterprise-type clients. I'm not saying it can't be done. It's been done multiple times, and it's been done very well by some enterprises that I've personally had the privilege to work side by side on. However, when we talk about a co-location facility, we're hoping that in the industry for the whole is they're looking at what are the natural risks in the areas of the country that they're going to be building. So when we talk about the Northeast corridors, we're worried about blizzards, hurricanes, high winds. This is actually the area that I originally come from. That Mid-Atlantic region would get hit with these nor'easters and hurricanes as the winds blow in, can get really nasty. We remember the big flood event with Hurricane Sandy in New York City, where basically Lower Wall Street district was flooded because of Hurricane Sandy. You look at the Southwest, or Southeast corridor, those areas where we start talking hurricanes, flooding, high winds. They do also suffer from the tornadoes, so you've got those to wrestle with. On the West Coast, you're talking, and more so on the West Coast, on the California, Seattle, Portland, Oregon type area, where you deal with earthquakes. You also got the risk of forest fires, hailstorms, and then we talk in the Midwest, we really have to be concerned about, you talk that Red River Valley, the flooding, the tornadoes, the blizzards, the hailstorms. So we kind of get a mix of all these. However, that upper Midwest, we're a little more favorable because we're not quite in that tornado belt that like Kansas and Missouri and those areas, and Tennessee kind of sit in that tornado kind of range, and even in the central Ohio area where you have to deal with not only tornadoes, but you also is a slight earthquake risk as well around that area. So as you're reviewing this, and as a design builder, we have to look at this. And so that's the lens we look at when we build these facilities, is that we start looking at it the lens of, okay, what risk are we dealing with, and what are the goals and objectives? Because, yeah, I could build you a very robust shell, but you might not be able to afford it. So we have to look at it through the lens of what is the reasonable expectation? What's the business practical applications that we need to be worried about, and what risks do we need to mitigate? So when we built Fargo and when we built Grand Forks, we looked at it from a standpoint of our biggest risk there is flood. So what did we do? We elevated the building. We worked on good civil engineering techniques. We looked at the pervious and impervious type coverage of that facility and that building to make sure that we raised it out. We built a large data center in the central Ohio area where we had to mitigate from an EF3 rated type tornado event. So when we have to deal with these things, and same thing with Fargo, where we had to build with EF, a very strong, robust precast panel that could deal with penetrations from a tornadic event, and then looking at how we're protecting the outside equipment, because it's just not the building, it's also the outside equipment, the heat rejection equipment that sits out there, the generators that sit outside. So when we're talking of dealing with those natural disasters, you have to look at it through the lens of what am I most susceptible to, and what can I do to mitigate that risk, and what's the cost to do that. So when we're building that, and that's the advantage that a purpose-built data center can provide, is that they will hopefully, and I say this tongue-in-cheek because not all colos are equivalent, but hopefully they've taken into account these natural disasters of those areas of the country that we have to be concerned about and made sure they put their best foot forward and did their best. I'm not saying that they're going to be able to protect from all events because, my gosh, look at some of the weather events that we tend to have these days, whether it's more because there's more cameras on it or it's more ubiquitous. Who knows? I won't get into that political quagmire, but what I'm saying is, obviously you hope they put their best foot forward based upon the history that we have, the 150 years of weather history and earthquake history, and that they put their best foot forward in order to purpose build that building.
All right. Okay. So you're saying that the mitigation of severe natural disaster isn't specifically tied to the tier. You're building you're designing the building to make sure that you adhere to the uptime required based on the region.
No, that's very astute, Jason. That's actually a good call. And you're right. The building is kind of excluded from that tier 1, 2, 3, 4 requirement. However, as a prudent designer builder, you'll be looking at it from that standpoint. The only impact that tiers have when it comes to the actual general construction of the facility is isolation when we go to a tier 3, tier 4 type build out, and we need isolation of the A path from the B path. That's a little bit of getting down in the weeds there, and we won't go there, but very astute question there. Yeah, it's not necessarily tied. However, best foot forward, right? Best design practices, best making sure that you've looked at what the area that you're building that data center and make sure you've mitigated those risks.
All right. Okay, and that's actually a good segue into the next commonly asked question that we have, which is, why should I work with a third party versus build my own data center? Now, you went into some of the details there on all of the different aspects that you have to keep in mind. What have you seen, because you've worked with both service providers like us, as well as enterprise customers building their own data center. Where do you see the differences, and why would you work with a third party versus building your own?
So if I was to be selfish, Tim, and wear my parallel hat and turn this into a parallel technology, I'd tell everybody to build their own data center. But I know that's not the right thing to do, especially for numerous clients. One of the biggest reasons is because most likely it's going to be a one-and-done project with an enterprise type customer or those types of individuals, and it's not something that you do over and over and over again. When you can repeat and get better and better and better, MidCo is now on their 4th data center. They've got the hang of it. They know what they're looking for. They have very high expectations as far as what the goals and objectives of what the facility should look like. They know what works. They know what doesn't work. So we've been through this, and we've been through the paces. And so when you deal with a third party, you've got the advantage of their expertise of being able to replicate, the facility and replicate the how they want it built. And also the fact is they're seeing multiple RFPs from people that have different compliance checklists that they need to hit from a security standpoint. What does my cage look like? What does the entrances and exits look like? How do people get in and operate, and do their work? They see that from multiple angles, and that strength can be brought into your design, and you kind of get you take the advantage of coming into their facility because of their expertise. The other big one that I think catches a lot of enterprises, and I've built a lot of enterprise data centers. Our team has built a lot of enterprise data centers over our history. I will say one of the biggest hang-ups that we run into is the fact is that it's not a 24/7 operation. And that's the advantage of having multiple people share a data center in a co-location facility. You get the advantage of having that 24/7 support. And that's a real luxury if you do have that 24/7 and you are an enterprise. But some of my customers that are enterprises and don't have the 24/7 support, what happens is they turn the keys over to a security guard or some sort of a third party that would come in and help out and give that support and give that and that doesn't necessarily work because you don't have your smartest feet on the street at the time to respond to a crisis situation. And there's ways to mitigate that, whether that be through a third-party on-call service, but there's other ways to do it. But if you're in a facility that can provide that 24/7, the constant monitoring as well is another key aspect. And hopefully you're in a colo that has robustly built out their monitoring of their mechanical, electrical, fire protection, physical security infrastructure that has all of these aspects and be able to provide that monitoring, the eyes and ears. Are you meeting your temperature? Are you meeting your uptime requirements? Do you have enough battery runtime? Is your generators operating? Did your transfer switch transfer? But also that experience is also a key aspect to working with a third party, whereas if you're trying to reinvent the wheel or do something on your own, if you're not dealing with a third party or a co-location or a cloud provider or one of the others, you have to go through that process, and that can be painful, can be expensive, and mistakes can be made. But that's the key, is being able to have somebody provide you and bring that muscle to the table, and provide you that scalable, flexible, monitored 24/7 experience that really ties it all together.
All right. So so expertise that has already been brought to the table, and one thing that I know that came up when we were working on the Fargo build and looking for a new place to put a data center was disasters that were created by people, not necessarily natural. So what I guess criteria would be a disaster caused by people, and how important do you think that is in selecting a data center and where it's physically located?
As far as looking at the impact of people or inexperience of possibly causing an impact to your operation, that's your biggest risk when it comes to a data center. And so having that ability to have an experienced individual watching over your facility, and it doesn't have to be, we've seen it where the water guy walks past the EPO, knocks the button off the wall, and then goes and puts the button back on and presses, and EPO's the room. EPO is the emergency power off. It's basically the kill switch for a data center. So silly stuff happens with human error or human intervention, and so that's why we like to eliminate eliminate the number of bodies in the facility, but make sure you raise the expertise. So we're really big on knowledge transfer to make sure that you've got the best feet on the street to respond to those types of issues and those types of questions. But that's that's part of it's part of the life of being in the data center industry, is making sure we eliminate those errors by keeping the design simple, keeping them straightforward, not getting sophisticated, but to be able to respond and be able to practice that operation. If you have an incident, what do I do? How do we practice that? And then when you've got a third party like a colo that I actually see practice and go through and practice their operations during an emergency situation, and you've got that engagement because you're in the business to do it. So you kind of want to practice. Not only that, a big thing about co-locations, at least the co-locations that we have had the privilege to work side by side and build their data centers for, we usually see them go through a very rigorous level 5 commissioning process, meaning black building tests, shut the facility down, bring the operation back up when we get done with the completion of the construction. And so when we do that practice and make sure that the components work as they should, do that full system by system functional test, but then do the overall data center system functional test and pre-checklist and all those. That commissioning process is very important in co-location facilities. Usually practice what they preach, eat their own dog food per se, but really make sure that that data center is going to stay operational throughout. And our hope is that they continue that training process and learning process as they work through that. But human intervention is a big cause of shutdowns in data centers. And it's plugging the wrong component into the wrong thing. It's silly mistakes, not following your dual cording procedures. Those are the things that we typically stumble over when it comes to those types of failures. And we've got nobody to blame but ourselves because we haven't set the expectations, or we haven't set the laid it out clear enough that they can do it. So hopefully you work through that process and become operationally robust in a way that you can kind of foolproof the system. The best way to do that is through experience.
Okay, so basically it's not just about what you built, but how you run it.
That's exactly right.
All right. So the next one takes a little bit of a turn for commonly asked questions. What's more economical, cloud or co-location services? Now, taking it back to like the overall overarching topic, a hybrid cloud strategy, this gets into the weeds a little bit on how you handle where you want to put your data, and I think it probably depends on each company and what specifically they're doing. From your perspective, having seen data center builds for both service provider and enterprise, have you seen where one is more economical, or a segment in which it's more economical to go cloud or co-location? Or I guess the other question is, have you seen it where people have only done one or the other, or does it always end up being a hybrid?
Yeah, so this is a great question because it's definitely the question that people ask us the most. And several years back, there was a lot of consultants going around telling people, well, you shouldn't be in the data center business, and it's like, well, why are you in the data center business? And they kept asking their clients. Well, that's kind of a non sequitur, and it kind of sets things off on the wrong foot because it basically leads you into a conclusion that, well, yeah, right, I shouldn't be in the data center business. Wade, I hate to tell everybody on this phone call is in the data business. It's how you should be in the data business. And so you have to be very deliberate about your decisions that you're making. And definitely economical when it comes to cloud, when it comes to data center, on-prem, cloud, or colo, you have to make sure you're looking at it apples to apples. One of the biggest changes that's happened recently is an accounting change that forces your hand to make sure that accountants are listing long-term liabilities. So when it became very sexy to outsource your data center from on-prem to a colo or to the cloud, it was a way for accounting to basically, move it from a CapEx to an OpEx beam. That's now all been level set. That's changed recently in accounting practices that now forces your hand to show those long-term liabilities. So now that's brought a light onto the economical side that it's not necessarily going to get you an advantage from an accounting spreadsheet standpoint, or so that's one of the things that you have to wrestle with and be aware of. Now, so when you talk about colo and cloud versus an on-prem data center, obviously you're going to spend more CapEx. That's just a given. But also you got to look at your operating expense when you come to building your on-prem data center. So there's a real wrestling there that you have to lay out. And I hate to say it, Jason, I know you're going to cringe when I say it, but it really depends. It depends on the size, the structure, the availability of property, what you have at your disposal. your strength of your internal teams, you've got to look at it through the lens of all those aspects. The thing with cloud is it's kind of a first easy in. When you go to cloud, I'm going to move all my stuff to the cloud. I'm in the cloud. Jason, I'm in the cloud, so it's virtually free. However, when you want to get that data back, that's where our clients start having trouble, and you start trying to claw this information back. So to look at it through the economical lens, yes, very important. Part of the analysis that needs to be done when you're making a decision. However, you've got to look at it from the risk standpoint, the security standpoint, the network standpoint. All these things weigh into more costs, more dollars, more efficiency. The thing with colo, though, and what we're seeing with a colocation is you're getting a nice advantage with how the data center is operated, how it's being run, and so you've got a real strength there with good expertise. And so that economical, that's got to fall into that risk standpoint, and you've got to put some dollars around that and saying, well, can we run a facility as good as a MidCo could, or good as this Colo XYZ company can? Can we run a facility apples to apples, truly apples to apples, and do a good job? Or are we fooling ourselves and we should just turn the keys over to them, let them run it? However, don't forget, you've got a network cost now because you're still going to be tapping into that, and what is that cost? So this is a real juggernaut question here that there's a lot of areas that people can turn a blind eye out to, but I think one of the biggest economical impacts is make sure you categorize your risk and put the right eggs in the right baskets. To your question, though, Jason, have I seen anybody go strictly to just the cloud or just the – I've heard it, but I never believe it. There's always something left behind. And so I think majority of people end up at a hybrid strategy stage, no matter what you try to do. There's always something left behind. It might be small, it might be insignificant, but there's always a strategy there, a hybrid strategy of some point. You can't get rid of all your IT equipment. It doesn't happen. So.
All right. Well, thank you for that insight. So now let's jump into our listener-driven Q&A section. Amy, you ready?
I am ready, Jason. Thank you. As a reminder, you can use the Q&A section in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen to submit questions. Make sure to submit them directly to the panelists, otherwise we may not see them. So I will pause and just give a moment to see if anybody has a question they would like to ask. All right, it looks like we have a question. The question is, we currently have our servers located near our break room closet. Is this a good or a bad location? So Tim or Jason, do you guys either one of you want to weigh in on that? That's a great question.
Well, Tim, since you're into the design side of the house, I'm going to let you take that one.
Yeah, and this is a good question. I'm glad somebody asked this. So we run into this frequently, and what happens is it kind of comes happenstance. Back in the days, we used to call this shadow IT, basically where a server would show up in some location or some closet, and it'd be next to the slop sink and the janitor's mops and everything, and so you kind of back into a data center strategy, and one of the big things that we keep saying is being deliberate about your conversations about what that room presents and what that provides, because you want to look at it from a standpoint of, is this reliably supported based upon what the business is demanding? In other words, what happens if that closet goes down? Who gets impacted? Because one of your most expensive costs when it comes to running an organization is people cost. And so if you have to shut down and send people packing up for the day because you cannot reach your storage your storage devices, you can't reach your common shares, or you can't get to the internet to research information, what does the impact of that room have? And so when you're talking about these rooms that kind of pop up or crop up, whether they be IDFs, MDFs, MPOPs, or a small little server storage network room, to make sure that you're being deliberate and identifying the risk in telling the management, hey, by the way, this is standing underneath our roof drain pipe that if that breaks, that roof drain will destroy our IT equipment and we'll be out for weeks. Let alone the redundant cooling, the redundant or possibly, or lack thereof, the redundant UPS or lack thereof. Is this a single pass system? Can we go down for 8 hours? Can we handle that as an organization? So that's part of the deliberate conversation, and this happens very frequently. We walk into a lot of rooms that are kind of happenstance. Well, geez, this is really an important room. I saw a major organization in the Twin Cities here that I stumbled into a room that was running their main core applications out of a facility that was kind of shoddily put together and unrobustly built. It's frustrating when we see the situations because those designers, those engineers, or those contractors did those firms no favors. So being deliberate about that conversation, making sure we understand what the reliability requirement is being demanded by the organization, and having that goals and objectives conversation so you know that you should probably move that equipment out. If it's not that big of a risk, if it's not that big of a cost impact to your organization or human impact to your organization, well, then maybe it's fine there. But as long as you've come to that deliberate conclusion that that's the right thing for your organization.
Awesome. That's a great answer. Thank you so much, Tim. We have another question. What is a good process to categorize our risks?
All right. Well,
Tim, Jason, feel free to jump in.
I'll jump in on that one. So as far as categorizing risk, there's multiple areas that you need to look at. First of all, regulatory. What'll get you in trouble if you don't do it? That would be something that I'd put at the top of the list. After that, it's what Tim just referred to regarding the break room closet, which is tolerance for interruption. What is the financial or operational impact of a company if you have an outage of certain infrastructure? So that leads into that hybrid strategy of there are some services that absolutely have to be up 24/7. That's a good thing to co-locate. Or if you have something that doesn't need to have, all of that uptime, or you need to have it more local to you, that could be put into your own environment to be operated. But you really have to understand per service really that you're running in your IT infrastructure, what is your tolerance for interruption? And I think that's how you start categorizing those risks after you look at what your really legal obligations are for a lot of industries. You have anything to add to that, Tim?
No, that's you hit the nail on the head. It's looking at what the interruption to the business is when it comes to an IT infrastructure standpoint. So starting with that application discussion, it's really fun. It's actually a lot of fun. We love doing it when we have IT and facilities sitting across the table and you see that aha moment where that IT says, yep, this runs this business process, and facilities turns and goes, oh boy, that's really important to our organization. We probably should do something a little bit better than what we provided you for an environment. Now, this is not pointing fingers at IT or facilities. It's a collaborative engagement that needs to happen. And the fact is that they didn't know, expectations weren't given, so facilities didn't quite necessarily do what needed to be done there, but they didn't know. Meanwhile, IT is moving at a very fast pace and things happen. So having that deliberate conversation, sitting down, having those two entities in the same room when it comes to that. But as far as risk for the organization, that's a conversation that happens at the executive levels and making sure that you've uncovered and delineated all these risks. And you'll never find every risk to a facility or a data center or a data center strategy. You'll never uncover it. That's nearly impossible, but you've done your best foot forward and you've done your best work to make sure you've understood what the potential risk could be, the probability of that event happening, that discussion, sure, but what is really the financial impact to our organization should we not do that? Okay, what's the cost to fix that risk? Let's make a decision. Okay, that's how we work through that.
All right, Amy, do we have any more questions?
Yeah, we actually have one more question. I'm looking at MidCo for colocation, and I see that you have multiple locations. Which one should I select and why?
All right, well, at a high level, I could say that, we have different data centers run at different tier levels, which Tim had referred to earlier, and the level of resiliency built into those facilities. Another one might be due to regulatory compliance, you may need to maintain a data set or a mirrored infrastructure that is a certain number of miles away or outside of a certain impact area, let's say flooding, Red River Valley, if you need to make sure that you have an infrastructure that's outside of that. What other things have you seen, Tim, that would make people choose a specific location?
Yeah, right. It's reliability level needed. Definitely, it's got to be in your matrix as far as choosing. And then the other thing would be the fact of if you have data, if you really are a hybrid strategy, and you want some proximity, should you have an event in a single town, that might be something that would weigh into your decision matrix. When we're talking about this upper Midwest, we're talking about tornadoes, which tornadoes really you can't predict where they're going to land or where they're going to fall. And so, when you talk about, well, I need to locate this 30 miles away because I'm right next to a nuclear plant, well, that's a different story. Clearly a risk that you need to mitigate in order to have some diversity of your assets. We've had clients request a 75 to 100 kilometer range from their existing facility for some goal and objective that needed to be met. But then you're starting to deal with the network headaches of how do you do latency, how do you do active-active, and there's this big thing in our marketplace about is there truly an active-active environment where you could shut off a facility and still run in another? So I wouldn't get too hung up on the active-active component of that. However, I would say what is the best foot forward as far as a risk from a natural disaster or a man-made type, not like a some sort of a risk that you need to overcome. So then you start looking at it through a different lens. But really, I think you nailed it, Jason. It's reliability, and then you're going to be looking at what your network costs are going to be if you have to geographically separate them.
Thank you both for your insights. And to add to that, as a consultant, I would say see for yourself, right? So most data center providers, MidCo included, would love to give a tour of the facilities so you can see firsthand and ask questions, and that's what we're here for. So I would encourage anybody to reach out and get that information. All right, so it looks like that's all the questions that we have. So thank you to everybody who asked questions. We appreciate it very much. And we would like to give you some more information. So you can contact Jeff Sanders, our Strategic Business Sales Manager, and he'll get you paired up with an enterprise sales consultant. Or if you have an existing if you're an existing MidCo customer, you can reach out to your current sales consultant. Or you can always fill out our request a consultation form online at midco.com/consult. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. We really enjoyed having you here to learn more about data centers, the cloud, and how they fit together. You can learn more about co-location options by visiting our website, midco.com/datacenters. Plus, you'll find more useful data center and networking knowledge written by our consultants and company thought leaders by visiting midco.com/insightcenter. When you exit the webinar, please take a few moments to complete our brief survey, which will appear on screen. It will help us determine what topics to cover in the future. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much for joining us.